We're into that time of year now where the ground is getting softer and golfers are struggling with their contact. So often you'll hear players struggling with fat shots when the ground begins to get wetter. Now, the ground getting wetter certainly has a role in this, but it is not the reason why players are fat in their golf shots. The main reason is that we are not getting our low point far enough ahead of the golf ball to hit ball then turf contact. When the ground gets wetter, it shows up more. If we slightly hit behind the golf ball when it's soaking wet, we will see more fat shots. In the summer, a little bit firmer, we can kind of drop kick it, use the bounce of the club a little bit and get away with it. But in the winter, we're going to get really punished for it. If we want to improve our ball striking this winter and get away from hitting those fat shots, we need to be working on our low point. Here are a few simple things you can look for in your swing to help you get your low point after the golf ball and start hitting flush iron shots on the golf course instead of fat ones this winter. So here's the first thing we need to understand, and this may seem very basic, but so many golfers out there that I've taught, once we've understood this concept, start hitting iron shots better just from learning this alone. And that is that we are trying to hit the ball and then the ground with our iron shots. We are not trying to scoop the golf ball up in the air. We're not trying to pick it off the surface. We're not trying to fit the golf club just in underneath. We are trying to hit the ball and then the ground. So we want the bottom of the golf swing or the low point to be both after and under the golf ball. That way then we are hitting on a descending strike down to the golf ball, which means that we're not going to have to deal with any of the wet ground before the golf ball. This is why you'll see in the winter, very good players, very good ball strikers don't tend to struggle with fat shots as much because their low point control is so much better because it's already further ahead. They're hitting ball and then turf. First thing is just make sure you're clear on the concept that we are trying to hit down on the golf ball with our irons to ensure that we get ball then turf contact. Now, having said that about the concept, sometimes we are doing things in our setup which is going to make it extremely difficult for us to actually execute on hitting ball then turf. The first big one we're going to look at is ball position. If you've got a ball position, and I've got an 8 iron here, so if you've got a ball position that is considerably forward in your stance, so let's just say closer to your left heel than the middle of your stance, what you're going to get is a scenario where you're basically voting to bring the low point much too far back or much too close to the golf ball. What I mean by that is that as the club comes in, because we've got the ball so far forward, we're not necessarily going to be able to get far enough ahead to get our pelvis and get our lead shoulder ahead of the golf ball to hit down and through to get that ball then turf contact. The first thing I would check is to ensure that when you're setting up, I like as a baseline, anything from a 7 iron to be underneath my sternum. Okay, as the club gets longer and the loft gets less, we might start to sneak it further forward in our stance because we don't want to be hitting quite so far as down. But just make sure you're not shooting yourself in the foot by having the ball position too far forward, too close to the lead foot when setting up with a mid iron. Now, just a word of warning, if you do put that ball back in your stance to improve contact, just be aware you're not just changing that. When you change ball position, you change the position of the low point, which means you're going to be changing angle of attack, club path, club face alignment, dynamic loft. Lots of things get changed when we move ball position. So if you start putting the ball too far back in your stance, thinking if I put it back, I can hit more down, which will help me get better contact, you may start to see shots that shoot straight off to the right for a right-hander. You may start struggling with some hook shots. You can, if you get extreme, start seeing some hosels come in. Just be aware that if you start pushing the ball back, you don't just change one thing, you're changing several things when we change ball position. So the second piece we can look for within setup is how are we distributing our weight. Now, many club golfers who struggle with fat shots will typically set up in a way where their pressure, their weight is more on their trail foot, like so. That's kind of immediately putting a vote in to have the low point further back, potentially behind the golf ball, kind of asking to fat it already. So just a very simple change for that is to feel as though you get more weight into your lead foot. Feel like you are pushing your pelvis actually slightly further forward. And when we go into the movement stuff, you'll see why that's extremely relevant. Just like so, that starts to create a low point that once again is being pushed further ahead of the golf ball to help me hit ball then turf and avoid hitting those fat shots. And the final piece we can look at in setup to help with getting better contact is our handle position. Where are our hands relative to the club head? So let's just say now I've got the ball further back, I've got my weight further forward, but my hands still sit like so. The handle is too upright. Once again, by having that there, I'm putting a vote for the low point to be further behind the golf ball. I'm not really helping myself here. Now, typically, if you get the ball further back and you get the weight on the lead foot, you're going to find you get natural shaft lean anyway, as it were. In other words, if you keep your hands underneath your sternum, let them hang, you'll find that you get the handle leaning forward. But sometimes golfers, again, can be just be misconception, think they need to have the club standing upright. Again, ball position appropriate, a little bit more weight on lead side, and just ensure that your hand sits slightly ahead of the golf ball, like so. Little proviso to that is that depending on the shot shape you're trying to hit, same with the ball position, we just have to ensure it matches up for what we're trying to do. Although if we are fatting everything, we probably want to get contact first before we start talking about ball flight. All right, let's start getting into some dynamic stuff, some movement stuff that we're doing in the golf swing, which can lead to us fatting it. Now, I'd say the biggest thing we need to understand is where are we trying to get to at impact? We discussed about the concept of hitting ball then ground. Where do we need to get to at impact to produce this? Well, a couple of quick key features we want to see at impact. We certainly want to see more weight on that lead foot, which is going to involve the pelvis shifting further forward, which is why starting with your weight too far back can make this a bit of a nightmare. So pelvis is certainly further forward, and we'd like to see the pelvis slightly open as well. What this does is this allows me to bring the hands around and forward, which again is giving me more shaft lean to give me a low point further ahead of the golf ball. First of all, understanding what position you're trying to get to at impact can have a huge effect of it, because many golfers, once again, just don't know that they're meant to have their pelvis that far forward when they hit the golf ball. That's probably the biggest one when it comes to fatting the golf ball. Players just not getting the pelvis far enough forwards, keeping it too far back where it either started or even further back from where it started. Just understand what position am I trying to get into, and you can do very simple drills where you're just getting to set up, push the pelvis further forward, rotate it open. You'll find you get this nice impact position just from those two movements, and just make little half swings hitting through, trying to almost punch the golf shot. So pushing forward, opening the hips, little half swing. If you do it correctly, you'll find that you take a really nice divot and you get a really nice bullet ball flight out of it with lots of distance on it compared to the swing length you were making. Once a player understands where they need to get to, that's part of the puzzle. That's knowing where I need to get to is a huge part of being able to do it. However, there are golfers who, even if they know they're meant to get their pelvis ahead and slightly rotated open, still don't do it at impact. And there can be many reasons as to why to this. And probably two of the biggest ones I see. One, it can be simply that when a player makes their backswing, they move their weight onto their trail side for too long and it gets stuck over here. When we're moving our pressure and moving our weight in the golf swing, we should really start to see that pelvis go back towards the golf ball before we reach the top of the backswing. Okay, in an ideal world, many golfers will take it all the way back. By the time they're at the top of their backswing, all of their weight is on their trail side, and it's just too much work to do to get back and beyond the golf ball. So they start to come down, hands come down out in front, they haven't got space, low point's not far enough forward, and boom, they end up hitting the ground before the golf ball. The other one we can see here is where players are trying to make up for something. They're doing a recovery move, as I like to call it. Classic example of this would be a player who, from the top of their backswing, goes over the top from here. So basically, they get too far out and above the plane. The club is too far out now, so they need to get the club back down and in to create contact. One of the moves they can do is to back up, move their weight into their trail foot, as that would help them get the club back down towards the golf ball. This unfortunately makes the club cut across it to the left, which is why you can see slices. And of course, if I'm leaning back this way, my low point's further back, I'm going to put it into the ground. Understanding why you would be moving your pressure or your weight, backwards through the golf ball can be to do with what you're doing in your backswing. So understanding that is a crucial part of this as well. But if it comes to you're out on the golf course, you keep hitting fat iron shots and you haven't necessarily got time to go to the range and work on it or to go and have a lesson, all these things I'd recommend you go and do. A couple of quick ways we can just alter our setup and make it more likely we hit better golf shots is the following. If you're really struggling out on the golf course and you just need something that's going to help you stop fatting those golf shots, here's the setup I'd like you to do. You're going to go into your normal setup, and let's just assume that's 8 iron sitting in the middle of my stance. I want you to push the ball half a ball back in your setup. So you'll see I've now got more shaft lean. The face will point slightly to the right, but like I said, we're doing all about contact on this one. I have more shaft lean, which is going to help me get the low point further forward. The ball is back, which means low point further forward. And I'm just going to put a little bit of weight into my lead side as well, kind of 60% rather than the usual 55%. All of this here is creating a low point much further after the golf ball. And we have to understand when we do that, this ball will probably come out lower and it will probably come out a little bit to the right because of how I'm setting up there. So when you do this, just be aware of that. A little bit lower and a little bit further to the right, but you should start to see you get much better contact. So if you're really struggling with fattening out on the golf course, That's the setup I wanted to go to, because as you can see, it starts to give us really good ball then turf contact.